Okay. Like I said, during the next 4 weeks, we are going to study some very interesting things about the three angels' message, right? Today, our title is Revelation CVs. This is a subject upon which the Christian world has a great degree of confusion. They're so confused about this study of who Revelation sea beast is. But the Bible is very clear when we sit and study, right? So we are going to discuss the identity of the beast that rises from the sea. Now, the three angels' messages says if anybody worships the beast, then in our next study together, we're going to study about the land beast. It's a beast that rises from the earth, right? Revelation 13:11 through 18. Then in the following weeks, we're going to talk about the image to the beast. And after that, we discuss the number of the beast. So we have several important studies coming up, and I hope you'll make it a point to be here every Sabbath afternoon. Now, to begin, to understand who the sea beast of Revelation chapter 13 is, who John is referring to, we have to go back to Daniel chapter 7, right? So let's review the content of Daniel chapter 7 briefly. It has long been recognized by students of Bible prophecy that the four beasts of Babylon, the four beasts of Daniel 7, represent four consecutive kingdoms. Each kingdom comes after the other falls, right? That rose during the course of history, beginning in the days of King Nebuchadnezzar, right? Now, in line prophecies, the prophecy begins during the time of the prophet. So if it's Daniel, then it began during the time of Daniel, and Daniel during the time was there during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. Now history proves that there were four beasts, and the first beast is a lion, the second is a bear, the third is a leopard, and the fourth is a dragon beast or a non-descriptive. You can't describe this beast. There isn't anybody who looks like it, right? Now, the lion represents the kingdom of Babylon, which ruled from 605 BC to 539 BC. The bear represents the kingdom of Medo-Persia, the Medes and the Persians. That was from 539 BC to 331 BC. In 331, we had the leopard, which represents the kingdom of Greece. Then, which was from 331 to 168 BC. Then comes the dragon beast. This beast represents Rome, right? The Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire, right? So in Daniel 7, we have clearly delineated four consecutive kingdoms: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, the pagan Roman Empire. Okay. Now, it's interesting to notice that this fourth beast, the non-descriptive dragon beast, which represents the Roman Empire, that beast has four stages of existence, right? Now, there are four consecutive kingdoms, but the fourth kingdom has four stages, right? So, in other words, it has four consecutive stages of dominion. And if we go to Daniel 7:23 to 24, we find these stages of dominion of the fourth beast, which is Rome. So we have stage number 1, which is pagan Rome, an empire, which was from 168 BC to 476 AD. Then we have stage 2, the divided Roman Empire, that was from 476 to 538 AD. And then we have stage 3, papal Rome, which was from, it is also called the Little Horn. It was from 538 AD to 1798. And then the fourth stage is the restored power of this sea beast, which is future. Okay. So let's read stage 1. the Roman Empire. This is the pagan Roman Empire, which was from 168 BC to 476 AD. Let's read what Daniel has to say in Daniel chapter 7, verse 23.
Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces.
So this is one fierce, non-descriptive beast. There is no, a lion, we know who a lion is, we know who a bear is, we know who a leopard is. But this one, it has no description, but it is a fierce creature. Okay? So the first stage of the fourth beast represents Rome. Is this dragon beast ruling by itself? So this dragon beast, it's ruling alone, right? It has no horns. No horns represent kingdoms. But this beast doesn't have kingdom. It is ruling just simply as the Roman Empire, pagan Roman Empire. So it's just ruling as a beast. Now in prophecy, a beast represents a kingdom. Now that is only in prophecy, right? Now there are beasts in the Bible. They don't necessarily mean a kingdom. If you're talking about prophecy, then it is talking about a kingdom. Now let's look at stage 2. Now, we are still the Roman Empire, right? Pagan Roman Empire. This stage 2 of this beast, there is a difference. It's the divided Roman Empire, right? Now, this is the second stage, and we find Daniel explains this stage in Daniel 7:24.
The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom.
Now, a horn in Bible prophecy represents a kingdom, right? Horns are power, ruling power. So the 10 horns are to rise from this kingdom. So the first stage is it rules the Lord, and then it gets divided into 10. Now, history proves that the Roman Empire was carved up and divided among the barbarian tribes who invaded from the north, right? So what do the 10 horns represent? They represent 10 kings or kingdoms that arise from the divided pagan Roman Empire. So now we see the stage 2 is the barbarian tribes that came in and divided the Roman Empire. Now the Roman Empire first governed by itself for an extended period of time, right? From Old Testament 168 BC all the way down to 476 AD. Now the Roman Empire was the one that was ruling during the time Jesus was on earth. But what happened in 476 AD is that the Roman Empire was divided into 10 kingdoms as a result of this barbarian invasion that came from the northern sector of the empire. So you have the dragon beast by itself. This is the Roman Empire. And then you have the 10 horns, which represent Rome in a divided state as a result of the barbarian invasion. Okay, so that's stage 2. Now moving on to stage 3. Let's read Daniel chapter 7, 24 to 25.
And another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time.
Okay, so now this third stage is also coming from the Roman Empire. So it has the characteristics of the Roman Empire, but this fellow is different. Now, what are the 3 stages of the fourth beast? It clearly delineated in Daniel chapter 7, 23 to 25. First, the beast rules by itself. It's the pagan Roman Empire. Then the dragon beast gets 10 horns. That is divided Roman Empire. Remember the idol, first it was iron, then it was iron and clay toes, 10, right? And it was fully divided by 476 AD, completely divided into 10. Then from among these 10 kingdoms of Western Europe, actually these are all the Roman countries in Europe, Western Europe, you have a little horn. A little horn is a small kingdom arising. And this little horn rules for time, and half a time. Now we have heard that time, and half a time before. In Revelation, it's called 42 weeks, or it's called 1,260 days or years, right? That's a different way of saying. So let's see what the characteristics that identify this power. Let's look at them, right? So that we can clearly understand who this power is. Now, this power rose after the 10, right? After the division of the pagan Roman Empire. And then it rose among the 10. It rose from within the 10, right? So it rises after the 10. The 10 are the divisions of Rome that today is called Western Europe, like Greece, UK, Spain, Italy, right? Portugal, all those, right? Which means that the little horn was going to arise, come up after 476, because only in 476 that all 10 divisions were complete. So this has to happen after that, right? When the Roman Empire was divided, because the little horn rises from among the 10 after the 10 have been divided, right? Then this little horn rose from the dagger, right? Now must the little horn be Rome, because it goes from the dagger, because it comes from the head of the fourth beast, right? So the fourth beast is Rome. So this little horn has to be Rome, right? A different kind of Rome. It's still Rome, right? Now, when he rises, he would uproot the 3 horns. He would remove 3 kingdoms, right? Then he would speak great words, pompous words. He would persecute the saints. He would kill those who were faithful to God, right? The Most High, he would persecute the saints of God. Then he ruled for 3.5 times. Our time is a year. 3 years and a half is 360 years into days. It will give you 1,260 days, and a day in prophecy is a year, right? So it's equivalent to 1,260 prophetic years, because prophecy days are equal to years, right? So this little horn rules for 1,260 years. Then it says he thought he could change God's law. Actually, you can't change God's law, but he thought he could. He thought he could change God's time, right? And would recover its power after the end, right? So the little horn will have another period of dominion after its power has been taken away at the end of the 1,260 years, right? So in other words, this little horn piece, this little horn power, has 2 periods of dominion. A past stage during the 1,260 years and a future stage. Now the question is, what does the little horn represent? Right? Now, to be open and frank with you, there is only one power in the world that fits every single one of these characteristics that we have looked at. And that is the Roman Catholic papacy. Remember, we are talking about systems and not people. So let's go quickly through the reasons why. Number 1, did the papacy rise after Rome was divided? Yes. Did the papacy arise among the nations of Western Europe? Yes, Italy, right? Did the papacy rise from Rome, the fourth beast, the fourth kingdom? Yes. Did the papacy uproot 3 kingdoms? Yes. They were the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. They were uprooted by the papacy because they didn't agree with the papacy's theology, and there's absolutely no trace of them. There is no descendant of them. They were completely removed. Then the great words, did they speak great words of blasphemies? defined in the Bible. Blasphemies are defined in the Bible as someone who claims to be God on earth, or someone who claims to have the power to forgive sins. Did they do that? Do they do that? Yes. Does the papacy claim, or did it claim in the past that the Pope is the representative of God on earth? Yes. Did the papacy say that it has a right to forgive sins? The confessional? Hmm? Did the Roman Catholic papacy persecute the saints of the Most High? It certainly did during the 1200 years. For example, like the Inquisition. Did the Roman Catholic papacy rule exactly 1260 years? Absolutely. They ruled from 538 AD to 1798, when Napoleon's General Berthier took the Pope captive and broke the power and control they had over the state. Right? Now, the papacy, when the church controls the state, but the church continued, but that power they had over the state was broken. Did the papacy claim to have power to change God's laws? Absolutely, right? If you look at their catechisms, they have removed the second commandment, worshipping idols, and they have instead, then they have 9, no? So then they divided the 10th commandment, right? To make it 10. Now, further, the papacy, as we are going to study, has claimed to have changed power. They claim that they have the power to change God's holy day of rest from Sabbath to Sunday. They claim that. There is no need for us to even think about it, but they very openly say the church has the authority and they are the ones who changed it from Saturday to Sunday. So that's where the observance of Sunday really originated, when they said that they have the power to change God's law. Furthermore, the papacy made the attempt to change God's time. Now, we don't have time to go into that issue, but the word times in scripture is referring to God's prophetic calendar. Now, how God says that prophetic events are going to take place or transpire. Now, there were 2 Roman Catholic priests who actually established 2 rival methods of interpreting prophecy. Now, prophecy, now like Daniel, you got Babylon, and then Babylon fell, and then Medo-Persia took power, then Medo-Persia fell, and Greece came into power, and Rome. So they are consecutive. It's called the historicist method. History moves without breaks. But these 2 Roman Catholic priests, they brought out a method. Like one said, one is about the Petrism established by Louis de Alcazar, who said that prophecies about the Antichrist were fulfilled past. It has already been fulfilled, right? By a nasty individual called Antiochus Epiphanes, right? That was in 163 BC, sometime there, right? It has already taken. Then another priest arose, whose name was Francisco Rivera, who said that the prophecy, not all of those prophecies, but the one on the Antichrist, is going to be fulfilled in the future. So you get the preterist and the futuristic ideas, and clearly the Bible teaches us that prophecy is flows. It has a historical flow. There are no breaks to it. So what happened is God's prophetic calendar, which showed that the prophecy was fulfilled in these prophecies, was changed to the past or to the distant future, so that people would not have an idea of what was taking place. They would have thought, oh, okay, that's done and finished, or they think, okay, it's in the future, no concern of mine now, when actually prophecy is taking place now, right? So every single detail of this characteristic, the Catholic papacy fits to a T, right? It fits to a T. Now, as mentioned, the papacy actually has 2 stages of dominion, right? In Daniel chapter 7, the second stage of dominion of the papacy is implied, right? It is not openly said, it is implied or unspoken. It's not explicitly or obviously stated. We know that it's there, but it's not very clear. It it is implied but not clear. But how do we know that? Well, Daniel 26 and 27 of Daniel chapter 7 tells us something very important. Let's read that.
But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away the little horn's dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him.
Okay, now question for you. Is the little horn the power that is going to be ruling when Jesus comes? Is the little horn power going to be the power that's ruling when Jesus comes? Yes. Why do we say that? Because it says here that that its dominion will be taken away from him and given to the saints of the Most High. So dominion means they are ruling. So how can you take a dominion if they're not ruling, right? That means that the papacy must have two periods of dominion, right? One in the past 1,200 past in the 1,260 years, and one in the future where it will control basically the political systems of the world as we are going to study, right? And it will be destroyed according to Daniel 7:26 and 27 by the brightness of the coming of Christ. So clearly this prophecy is pointing towards the Roman Catholic papacy, the system, right? So let's summarize the four stages of the fourth beast. The fourth beast alone is Imperial Rome. That's first one. That is 168 BC to 476 AD. Then the fourth beast with 10 horns. That's the divided one. If you look at the statue, it is the toes, the 10 toes, right? So that is divided Rome that began in 476 AD, which goes on till 538 AD. The fourth beast is the little horn, ruling for 3.5 prophetic years. This is the papal Rome, stage 1, right? It was from 538 AD to 1798, which was exactly 1,260 years. Then we have a future one, the fourth beast, when the little horn is restored to power, right? This is the second beast, second stage, which is in the future. It's not happening now. Now let's go to Revelation 13, 1 to 10, and let's see the parallel between Revelation 13 and Daniel 7. Now, Revelation 13, 1 to 10 describes the same power. Only it doesn't call this power the little horn. It calls this power the beast. Even a cursory, just a casual glance at Revelation 13, 1 and 2 reveals a clear link with Daniel chapter 7. It's the same sequence of powers that we found in Daniel chapter 7. Let's read Revelation 13, 1 and 2.
Revelation
Go ahead.
13, 1 to 2. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority.
Okay, question. Do we have the same beast that we find in Revelation 13, 2, that we found in Daniel chapter 7? Absolutely, right? Because there's a lion, there's a bear, there's a leopard, and there's a dragon, right? So it's talking about the same beast that Daniel chapter 7 was talking about. And by the way, Revelation 12 says that the dragon has 10 horns, okay? And then the dragon with the 10 horns gave his power to the beast. That's what Revelation 12 tells us. Now notice this, in Daniel 7, we have the lion, the bear, the leopard, the dragon, 10 horns, and a little horn. Okay, that's the sequence. So the lion, bear, leopard, dragon, dragon divided into 10 horns, and then from the 10 horns comes the little horn. It uproots 3 and becomes a little one. Then in Revelation 13, we find lion, bear, leopard, dragon, 10 horns, and the beast. That is why the little horn is called the beast in Revelation. So in other words, the little horn is the same as the beast because you have the same sequence of powers. And not only the same sequence of powers, but the beast does the same things that the little horn did during the same period of time. Now notice in Revelation chapter 13, we can catch a clear reference to the same activity and the time period of this beast that the little horn exercised. Let's read Revelation 13 verses 5 and then 7.
Revelations 13, 5 to 7. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation.
Okay. Now we have studied this before. 42 months are the same as times and half a time or 3.5 times and 1260 days or years. So the sequence of powers are the same as Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, right? And the activities are the same. There's 2 ways we can know that the little horn is the same as the sea beast that rises from the sea. Now, seas in prophecy represent tumultuous stream with warring nations, right? Number 1, because it's the same sequence of power: lion, bear, leopard, dragon, right? Divided dragon, little horn, stage. Number 2, because the little horn and the beast perform the same activities during the same time. So it's 2 different names or ways of referring to the same beast power. Now, the 4th stage of the dragon beast. Let's talk about that a little. It's important to underline that while the 4th stage of the dragon beast is only implied, only suggested, or it's not very clearly stated in Daniel 7, it is made very explicit and clear in Revelation 30. For we are told there that after the beast rules for 42 months, it will have another period of dominion. In between these 2 stages, the beast is convalescing with a deadly wound. Let's read Revelation chapter 13, verse 3.
And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast.
Okay, so that clearly is in the future, right? Now, who was mortally wounded? The one of the heads of the beast. So we have 4 stages clearly of this Roman power. This number 4 power. We have the dragon by itself, the dragon with 10 horns, the dragon with the little horn, papacy little horn, receives a deadly wound, and then the deadly wound is going to be healed. That's stage number 4. We are going to talk about how it got its wound and how it's going to be healed, right? So hold on to those questions. Now, there are a couple of crucial questions that we need to ask about this deadly wound that the beast received at the end of the 1260 years. With what weapon was the beast wounded? What did the sword represent? It was wounded by a sword. What does the sword represent? And how and when did the beast acquire this sword? Because the Bible says he killed with the sword and he would be killed with the sword. So this beast used the sword to kill, and then that sword that he used also killed him. Let's unpack that, right? So the question is, how did the beast acquire the sword so that he could kill with that sword, and that sword would turn against him and kill him also? Now, what is the meaning of this deadly wound? What does it mean, receive the deadly wound? In what sense was the beast wounded to death? Then what keeps the deadly wound from healing? Why hasn't it healed? And when and how will the wound be healed? And by whom will the wound be healed? Now, those are the questions that we have to ask. Let's go to our next section. The weapon that wounded the beast. So now we're going to find out what this weapon was that wounded the beast, right? Now, Revelation 13:10 explains that the deadly wound that ended the dragon's third stage of rule was given with a sword. Let's read Revelation 13:10.
Revelations 13:10. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword.
Okay, so he is using the sword to kill, and then that sword is killing him. Now, someone might object that the text doesn't say that the beast killed with the sword and must be killed with the sword. The text uses the indefinite term, he who. But Revelation chapter 13, verse 14, leaves us with no doubt that this was the beast that killed with the sword and in turn was killed with the sword. So see how beautifully the Bible explains itself. So let's read Revelation chapter 13, verse 14.
And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived.
Okay. So here it's explicit, right? Very clear that it was the beast that killed with the sword and the beast that was killed with the sword or received this mortal wound. So the beast used the sword to kill, and then that sword turned against and killed him, right? Simple. Now, what is represented by a sword? Now, we did this last week, and let's go and see whether what applied to ancient Israel applies to this prophecy, right? So the question is, what is the sword? In the Bible, there are two different meanings. So let's go to the first one, which is found in Ephesians 6:17, where we have that the sword was given to the church. Let's read that.
And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
Okay, so what does the sword represent in this first instance? It represents the word of God, the Bible, right? Now let me ask you, to whom did Jesus give this sword? We studied this last week, like I said. He gave this sword to the church. And how does the church use this sword? By preaching the word of God through the power of the Holy Spirit, right? So this sword belongs to the church. And it is used to preach the gospel, right? To share the word of God with the world. So this is the word, right? That cuts two-edged sword. It's the word of God. The power comes from the Holy Spirit when we read it. Now, what is the sword that wounded the beast, right? So it goes without saying that this can't be the sword that wounded the beast at the end of the 1,260 years, because we are told explicitly that the very sword that the beast used was used against him. The beast used that sword to kill the saints, and during the 1,060 years, and that could be used to kill it at the end of the period. So clearly the Bible is speaking about a different sword, right? People were not killed with the Bible, obviously. The papacy didn't use the Bible during the 1,600 to 1,260 years to kill dissenters, but rather they forbade the Bible. People couldn't read the Bible. Bibles were changed to pulpits. Bibles were burnt in France. So the symbol of the sword in the context of Revelation 13 must represent something different than what we find in Ephesians 6:17. Now, the crucial question is, which sword did the papacy use to persecute God's saints during its period of supremacy, when it was ruling supreme? So the question is, what does it represent? The answer is found in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 4. Romans 13, 1. Let's read that.
Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil.
Okay. Now, what is meant by the authority, by the way, or all the times it's used here, it's referring to the government or the civil authorities, the civil government that rules the country. Okay. So clearly there is another sword in scripture, and that sword is in the hand of the civil power, right? The governing powers of this country. So we find that in the Bible, symbols are flexible. That is to say, they don't always mean the same thing. You have to read the context in which they are given, and the context must dictate their meaning. Now, the sword that mentioned in Romans 13 threatens civil penalties, incarceration, confiscation of goods, fines, deaths. If somebody kills them, that's given the death penalty if they are found to be guilty, right? If they steal, then they are fined. If they do something, their property is confiscated, right? So all that takes place against the transgressors of the government laws. Now, this passage makes it very clear that this sword doesn't belong to the church. Did God give this sword to the church? No, it belongs to the state. This sword is punitive. It is not persuasive. Punitive means it brings on judgments. The Bible, the sword, the word of God is the Bible. It is persuasive. It moves us to change our lives and come, right? So this is punitive. The other one is persuasive. It's important to realize that God has established both church and state, right? God permits rulers to sit. He permits them, right? In God's order, they both have their legitimate and rightful place, right? Governments have a rightful place. The church has its place. Jesus announced that he would build his church upon himself when he said to Peter, upon this rock, Jesus is the rock, right? I will build my church in Matthew 16:18. The church is Christ's spiritual kingdom, right? When he said, Peter, I will give you the keys to the kingdom, he wasn't only speaking to Peter. He was also speaking to all the apostles and all of us who came afterwards, because Jesus gave us the keys to share his kingdom with the world so that we could all be a part of that spiritual kingdom. Now, remarkably, Jesus refused to allow his followers, right, or the emerging church at that time, to use the temporal sword to defend his kingdom, right? He refused to allow them to use the sword of the state to defend his spiritual kingdom. Now remember, during his Garden of Gethsemane arrest, when the mob came to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, we are told that Peter drew his sword. Actually, Peter was aiming at the head, but Peter is a fisherman, so he only got the ear. He cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. Now, the Roman Catholic Church says that Peter is supposed to be the first pope, although we know that biblically and historically that is not true. But anyway, he took out his sword and he swung at the high priest and cut off his ear. Peter was using the temporal sword. He was using the sword of the state to defend his master's kingdom. And what did Jesus say to Peter? Good job, Peter, what you did? No. Notice the very interesting words that Jesus used in Matthew 20. He used those words to rebuke Peter. Let's read Matthew 26, verse 52.
But Jesus said to him, Put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword.
Does that sound a lot like Revelation 13:10, where it says that he who kills by the sword must be killed by the sword? So this is speaking about the sword, the literal sword that is used to defend. Right? This is not talking about the sword, the literal sword that is used to defend Christ's kingdom. Christ would have absolutely nothing to do with the sword of the state, of the civil power, used to defend his kingdom. Now, a few hours later, when Pilate asked Jesus if he was the king, Jesus promptly replied in John 18:36. What did he say?
John 18:36. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here.
Okay. So how many kingdoms did Jesus recognize? He recognized 2 kingdoms, right? And Jesus refused to allow his followers to employ the temporal sword to establish or defend his spiritual kingdom. Now, what is the deadly wound? Is our next question. What is the deadly? We can only understand the deadly wound if we understand what the sword is, right? Now, the sword that is spoken of in this prophecy is the ability of using the civil power on those who disobey civil law. But what happened with the beast? The beast is a religious power, an apostate church, right? We got that clear? And the beast used the sword of the state to punish everyone who was not in agreement with the beast's apostate religious, theological belief system or its teaching. Now that we know that the sword of Revelation 13:10 represents punitive or punishing power of the state to enforce civil laws, we must seek to discover what is meant by a deadly wound, because we need to understand what the deadly wound is. So the civil powers use punishing powers so that people don't do wicked things that go against the law of the land. Okay, now we're going to talk about this deadly wound. Now, a careful study of Revelation 13:10 reveals that the deadly wound does not refer primarily to the confiscation of territory of the Roman Catholic Church. It doesn't mean that they received a wound because they took over the land and what they owned. Neither is it the elimination of the Roman Catholic Church as a church. Because the church, after the papacy received its wound, the church functioned. They have an infant baptism, they have a wedding, the church continued, right? Now, the deadly wound was given to the papacy when the sword of the state. Now, the papacy is the joining of church and state, right? If the church is separate and the state is separate, then it's not a papacy, it's a church and it's a state. But when the church controls the state, that becomes what is called the papacy, right? So the wound, the deadly wound was given to the papacy when the sword of the state that the papacy had used to persecute God's people turned against it. Now, does a church have an army to go and fight with people? No. So the church was using the country's army, the state's army. And because the church would get in the state to do its killing of these people. Now they use this this sword. Now that sword, this army turned against them. And the deadly wound then was the removal of the sword of the state from the hand of the papacy. Nothing less, nothing more. So the power that the papacy had to control the state, to get it to do the things that it wants, that power was removed. And that is what the deadly wound means. The power that they could control the countries and get them to do their thing is what was removed. That is what is called the deadly wound. Is that clear? So when they lost their power to control the countries, then they no longer had power. Then they just simply became the church because that power was removed. Now, next question is, how did the papacy obtain this sword? Now, between the year 300 and the year 476 AD, hordes of barbarian tribes from the north, coming from the north, invaded the Roman Empire and carved it out, broke it up, right? Divided it. The last emperor of Rome, of pagan Rome, of the Roman Empire was Romulus Augustulus, okay, who was disposed in the year 476, completely removed, okay? And as a result, there was no more an emperor in Rome, no one to civil power to control Rome. And Rome became a kingdom without a ruler. So that is like if this country doesn't have a president or a prime minister, there's going to be chaos, right? There has to be somebody to control. So everything was turned upside down and the empire was in disarray and in a chaotic situation because everybody was doing what they wanted to do. Nobody could control them. Now the barbarian incursions into the Roman Empire turned it upside down and left it without a civil ruler who could preserve law and order. In the midst of this chaotic situation, the barbarian kingdom enticed, right, the Bishop of Rome to take the reign of the civil power. Now, the Bishop of Rome was in charge of the church. He was the head of the church. Now, these barbarians, since there was nobody to control the people, there was no political power because the emperor had been disposed of. There was a breakdown of law and order. So they asked the Bishop of Rome to take the reins of civil power. This bishop accepted, and he was now not only the spiritual leader of the church, but also the temporal ruler of the state. And that is what we mean, the amalgamation of church and state. So he began to have church powers and state powers. So he could do what he wanted with the state power, right? That is how the papacy was born, actually. Now let's read some interesting statements written by historians about this event. Now these are not Adventists, these are all, some of them are from the Catholic Church, some of them are Episcopal historians. So let's see what they have to say about this church, the Bishop of Rome being given the temporal power of the state. Let's start with Cardinal Henry Edward Manning. He was a cardinal to the Roman Catholic Church, and he explains what happened when the empire fell apart, right? He describes the manner in which the Roman pontiff originally gained his power. When the barbarians invaded the Roman Empire and tore it apart, Manning explains this in his book, Temporal Power of the Vicar of Jesus Christ.
The pontiffs found themselves alone, the sole fountains of order, peace, law, and safety. And from the hour of this providential liberation, when by a divine intervention, the chains fell off from the hands of the successor of St. Peter, as once before from his own. No sovereign has ever reigned in Rome except the Vicar of Jesus Christ. Henry Edward Manning, The Temporal Power of the Vicar of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so the papacy, now the papacy, while Rome was in place and governing, was restrained. Could they use their church powers to control the state? No. Why? Because the emperor was the power for the state. So they couldn't. They couldn't. They were just a church. So that's called restraining. They were restrained. Now we're going to read the Bible text about this restraining power. As long as the pagan Roman Empire was governing, the papacy couldn't become a papacy. They were just simply the church. Now Manning further explains this in his same book on page 11 and 13.
If the papacy waited until such a time as God should break its bounds asunder and should liberate it from subjection to civil powers and enthrone it in the position of temporal sovereignty of its own. Henry Edward Manning.
So Manning is saying that when the civil power of Rome was removed by the barbarians, the Bishop of Rome filled the vacuum. And because the arbiter in civil and became the arbiter of in civil affairs as well as religious affairs. So when that happens, don't you think that they're going to push their religious agenda onto the civil powers? Right, that happened. Remarkably, Manning refers to this taking over of civil power by the Bishop of Rome with the expressions such as breaking bonds asunder and chains falling off. So what is the liberation of the papacy? The liberation of the papacy to come into full power is the falling off of chains. It means that now the papacy can govern not only the religious affairs, but also the civil affairs, right? So they had full control on both. Now, let's read 2 Thessalonians 2, 6-7. Have you ever read this verse before about this mysterious restrainer that needed to be removed for the man of sin to manifest himself? Now, this is cryptic language. The Apostle Paul had already referred to this removal of the civil power from the Roman Empire when he wrote about the removal of this mysterious restrainer. So who is the restrainer that gave the man of sin, which is another name for the papacy, also known as the harlot in Revelation, right? So the man of sin, full control. Let's read 2 Thessalonians 2, 6 and 7.
And now you know what is restraining the civil power of the Roman Empire, that he may be revealed in his own time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains the emperor will do so until he is taken out of the way.
Okay, so the papacy couldn't raise his head, couldn't come to power as long as the Roman emperor was restraining him, was in power. Is that clear? So the restraining power was the civil power of the Roman Empire and the restraints of the emperor. What is it that liberated the papacy so that it could use the sword of the civil power? It was the fact that the barbarian invasions threw the Roman Empire into upheaval and chaos. So those nations said to the Bishop of Rome, we need to bring law and order, govern us, not only in religious affairs, but also in civil affairs. Now, Revelation 20 shows what captivity means. It says, bound with a chain, not able to use the kings of the nations to fulfill his purpose. So he's bound with chains. He cannot use them because they are in power. And that is why he doesn't have power now. The countries are governing on their own. He can't control the countries, so he's very stealthily doing it behind hand. But right now they are independent of the church. Right. Now let's read a few statements from some theologians on the style of government that existed during the Middle Ages. This statement that is up there is from James Conroy, a Roman Catholic.
Long ages ago, when Rome, through the neglect of the Western emperors, was left to the mercy of the barbarous borders hordes, the Romans turned to one figure for aid and protection and asked him to rule them. And thus, in this simple manner, the best title of all to kingly right commenced the temporal sovereignty of the popes, and meekly stepping to the throne of Caesar. Caesar. The vicar of Christ took up the scepter to which the emperors and kings of Europe were to bow in reverence through so many ages.
Okay, so we see that he now becomes the controlling power, right? Scores of church historians have said the same thing. Who was that they asked to rule? The Bishop of Rome. Today is called the Pope, right? Notice the terminology. Meekly stepping to the throne of Caesar, the vicar of Christ took up the scepter to which the emperors and kings of Rome were to bow in reverence through many ages, 1260 years. He got them to do his bidding. Now, here's another statement from another historian, Karl Conrad Eckhart.
Under the Roman Empire, the popes had no temporal powers. But when the Roman Empire has disintegrated and its place had been taken by a number of rude, barbarous kingdoms, the Roman Catholic Church not only became independent of the states in religious affairs, but dominated secular affairs as well.
Then the next one. It says that during the whole medieval period, there was in Rome a single spiritual and temporal authority, referring to the papacy, exercising powers which in the end exceeded those that had ever lain within the grasp of the Roman Emperor. So his powers were exceeded that of the Roman Emperor. Now let's read another church historian, John H. Figgis.
In the Middle Ages, the church was not a state. It was the state, or rather the civil authority for a separate society was not recognized, was merely the police department of the church.
Okay, so are you catching the picture what they're talking about? What was the sword that the Roman Catholic papacy had in its hand? It was the sword, not the Bible. It was they didn't use the Bible to persuade or kill people. It used the civil power to accomplish its purposes, which it took over when the Roman Empire fell, when the Roman emperor was disposed of, right? So then he became and his power was greater than the Roman emperor's power, right? Now, by the way, it's interesting to read a bull. A bull is a personal letter by the 8th Pope. It was written in the year 1302. The name of the bull is Unam Sanctum. And notice how this Pope Boniface the Eighth interprets the two swords.
We are informed by the texts of the Gospels that in this Roman Catholic Church and in its power are two swords, namely the spiritual and the temporal. Both, therefore, are in the power of the church. That is to say, the spiritual and the material sword. But the former, the spiritual, is to be administered for the church, but the latter, the temporal, by the church, the former in the hands of the priest, the latter by the hands of the kings and the soldiers, but at the will and sufferance of the priest.
Okay, so what he's saying is, the first is the priest handle it, that is the word. Second is also they handle it, it's in the hands of the king, but according to the will and sufferance of the priest. So the priest is the one who tells them what to do, right? So he acknowledges that there are two modes, right? Are you catching what Revelation is talking about? Revelation 30, when it says, "He who kills with the sword will be killed by the sword, with the sword." How did the papacy kill with the sword? It did not do it as a church. It actually influenced the state to do it for them, right? Do you remember last week we were talking about what happened to Jesus? Could the church execute the penalty upon Jesus? Absolutely not. So what did they do? They pressured and influenced Pilate, right? And got him to do it for them. So what did they do? They had to go to Pilate. They had to get the help of the civil power to kill Christ. That is why the same thing that happened during the Middle Ages, when the saints of the Most High were killed by this power, that's what prophecy teaches us will take place in the future. When this wound, when the church gets the authority of the civil sword once again, the Bible tells us they will get it in the future. Now, what happened in the year 1798? Now, the year 1798 marked the climax of the French Revolution. That the French Revolution began in 1789. The revolution was an uprising against both kingly power and the priestly intolerance. People had had enough of the church and its nonsense, and they had had enough of the king. So on February 12, 1798, General Berthier, he was a general of the troops of Napoleon Bonaparte, entered the Vatican City, disposed or arrested the Pope. The Pope was Pope Pius VI, informed him that his power was at an end. He could no longer control the state, took him a prisoner to France, where he died later in exile. The Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte had already given the order that a successor not be elected. It is interesting to know how historians describe the deadly wound of 1798. So you know what the deadly wound is? When his power was withdrawn, taken away from him. They employ language, historians employ language very similar to that of Revelation 30. Let's look at a few examples. Now remember, these are secular historians. Let's go to George Trevor. He's in his book Rome from the Fall of the Western Empire.
The papacy was extinct, not a vestige of its existence remained. And among all the Roman Catholic powers, not a finger was stirred in its defense because it no longer had the support of the state. The eternal city had no longer prince or pontiff. Its bishop was a dying captive in foreign lands, and the decree was already announced that no successor would be allowed in its place.
Then let's read by Joseph Rigaby in Lectures on the History of Religion has to say.
No wonder that half of Europe thought Napoleon's veto would be obeyed and that with the Pope, the papacy was dead.
Wow. These are historians, right? Now let's look at the book Papal Drama. This was written by T.H. Gill. Let's see what he has to say.
Multitudes imagined that the papacy was at the point of death and asked, would Pius VII be the last pontiff, and if the close of the 18th century would be signalized by the fall of the papal dynasty.
Can you see they are all talking about the deadly wound and the fall of the papal dynasty? Now another further quotation from Frank B. Holbrook, Symposium on Revelation. Let's see what he has to say.
The papacy had suffered its deepest humiliation and appeared to be annihilated. The revelation also dealt in the wound which it seemed did not want to heal until far into the 20th century.
Okay, so he's talking about this, the revolution that dealt the wound, right? Now, one can't help but sense the irony of what took place in 1798. Now, France is known as the eldest daughter of the papacy. Why is that? Why is France known as the eldest daughter of the papacy? It's because Clovis, king of the Franks, right, was the first to officially give temporal power to the papacy in the year 508 AD. In 508, Clovis, the king of France, gave the papacy power, right? Temporal power. Strikingly, this very nation, France, that had first given the papacy the sword of the state, now turned on her mother and gave her the deadly wound, took it away from her. The French Revolution was a catastrophic event for the papacy. In the aftermath of the revolution, country after country in the Western world followed the example of France, establishing democratic governments that proclaimed their emancipation, their liberty, right, from the straitjacket of the papacy. But through the revelation, though the revolution well nigh annihilated the papacy, prophecy foretells that she will rise from her deathbed far more powerful and despotic than in the past. Prophecy tells us that, so you can be sure that she will come with greater force, right? Now, talking about the healing of the wound, Revelation describes this healing when she will come back in greater force. This is found in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3.
And I saw one of the heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound has healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast.
Now, what is the healing of the papacy's deadly wound from what we have learned today? It is primarily the restoration of not the it is not, let me put it this. It is not primarily restoration of a confiscated territory. Nothing is confiscated in it. It is not the recovery of her ecclesiastical power. She continued to be a church. She's continuing to be a church, right? Like I said, the term papacy is a code word, right? And the code word is for a religious political system that employs the power of the state to compel people to obey its dictates. In other words, the papacy is not merely a church, but an amalgamation, a joining of church and state, a joining of church and state, then it becomes the papacy. Now, if the deadly wound means that the state turned against the papacy, took away the sword from her in 1798, then the healing of the wound must mean that the state will once again give back her power that she had over the sword that she lost in 1798, February 12th. Why hasn't the mortal wound healed yet? Has she got her power back? Does she control the countries today? Not like she did then, right, sir? Right? So, the late Malachi Martin, now he was a Jesuit once again of the Roman Catholic Church, and he authored this best-selling book, The Keys of This Blood, in 1986. He wrote a very revealing statement. I don't think he really realized that he was writing and the prophetic implications of what he wrote. Let's read what he says. This was quoted in Christianity Today. Let's see what they say. Now, this is a Jesuit Catholic priest.
1500 years and more, Rome had kept as strong a hand as possible in each local community around the wide world. By the large and admitting some exceptions, that had been the Roman view until 200 years of inactivity. had been imposed upon the papacy by the major secular powers of the world.
Okay, so what is it that keeps the deadly wound in place? The major secular powers of the world, they have not allowed the papacy to climb on them again, right? They have not allowed the papacy to use them. Are we starting to see changes within coming from the United States? We most certainly are, right? We are seeing the church trying to appeal to the arm of the state in order to get her agenda across, right? We can see that very clearly happening in the States because that's from where all this will start. When we study next week, we will see. Now, question. When he wrote in 1986, 39 years ago, 86, yes, he says that 200 years of inactivity had been imposed on the papacy by major secular powers of the world. Now, if you go back from 1986, 200 odd years, where do you arrive? You arrive at the time of the French Revolution. So he's saying the French Revolution imposed 200 years of inactivity on the papacy, and that inactivity is imposed by the major secular powers of the world. And this Malachi Martin wouldn't have even dreamt that what he was writing was this. Now, Mrs. White wrote 100 years before Malachi Martin. Notice what she has to say. This is from The Great Controversy, page 564.
Let the restraints now imposed by secular governments be removed and Rome be reinstated in a former power, and there would speedily be a revival of her tyranny and persecution.
Okay. So the reason why the mortal wound has not yet healed is because the secular governments of the world have not allowed the papacy to ride on them, right? So speaking, the chains that fell off the hands of the papacy when the civil powers of the Roman Empire fell in the 3rd and 4th century were slapped back on her hands in 1798. So she was restrained up till the emperor, Roman emperor was disposed. Then she had her own free will, right? Killing and doing what she wanted. And then it was slapped back on her hand in 1798 by General Berthier. Now, when will this deadly wound be healed? The deadly wound will be healed when the sword which turned against the papacy will rise and be given once again to the Roman Catholic papacy to do what she did during the 1260 years. Right now, we see that it doesn't seem possible, but Bible prophecy is sure, and you can be sure that it will happen. Now, let's read a very telling statement by John W. Robbins. Now, he was a Reformed theologian, not a Seventh Day Adventist. Notice what it says in this quotation from him.
Ayn Rand was right when she wrote in 1967, the Catholic Church has never given up the hope to re-establish. She must have once had it and lost it. The medieval union of church and state, with a global state and a global theocracy as its ultimate goal. The Roman Church state is a hybrid, a monster of ecclesiastical and political power. Its political thought is totalitarian. And whenever it has had the opportunity to apply its principles, the result has been bloody repression. If during the last 30 years it has softened its assertions of full supreme and irresponsible power and has murdered fewer people than before, such changes in behavior are not due to a change in its ideas, but to a change in its circumstances. The secular governments keep her at arm's length. The Roman Church state in the 20th century, however, is an institution recovering from a mortal wound. If and when it reigns, so it must have lost its full power and authority. It will impose a regime more sinister
Minister.
than any the planet has yet seen.
That's when the deadly wound will heal. Right now, she has no power, but she's waiting very patiently till she gets it. And prophecy tells us she will. Now, Dave Hunt caught this. Now, Dave Hunt wrote a book, The Woman Rides the Beast. That book is, there are a lot of inaccuracies, incorrections, errors in that book. But one thing that he got straight is that the woman that rides the beast represents the Roman Catholic Church, the woman that rides the beast, right? And the beast represents the civil powers of the world. He got that right. Let's notice what he says here in this quotation.
Why do world leaders want to get into bed with the Vatican? Fornication metaphor. The heads of state in today's world all recognize that the Pope yields a power which in many ways is even greater than their own. It is not only Catholicism's 900 million subjects and enormous wealth that causes the world's most powerful governments to cultivate friendly relations with the Roman Catholic Church. It is because Vatican cities citizens are found in great numbers in nearly every country. They constitute an international network that reaches into the inside circles of the world's power centers.
He got that right? Now, once again, talking about Malachi Martin, in his book, This Keys of the Blood, he speaks about three systems that are vying for dominion of the world: capitalism, communism, and Roman Catholicism. Notice what he says. Now, remember, this is a Jesuit priest. And by the way, he died under very mysterious circumstances. Let's read what he says.
There is one great similarity shared by all three of these globalist competitors. Each one has in mind a particular grand design for one world governance. Their geopolitical competition is about which of the three will form, dominate, and run the world system that will replace the decaying nation system.
Globalist competitors, that is communism, capitalism, and the Roman Catholicism. Now, Martin harbors no doubt about who will win in this tooth and nail competition. He says the Roman Catholic papacy, and Martin describes in chilling words what will happen when the papacy regains its power. Let's read what he has to say in his book on page 16. No holds barred, because once the competition has been decided, the world and all that's in it, our way of life as individuals and citizens of the nations, our families, our jobs, our trade, commerce, and money, our educational systems, and our religious and our cultures, even the badges of our national identity, which most of us have always taken for granted, all will have been powerfully and radically altered forever. No one can be exempt from its effects. No sector of our life will remain untouched. Nobody who is acquainted with the plans of these three rivals has any doubt but that only one of them will win. He's quite sure, right? He's quite sure, and very chillingly tells about this, that like she did in the past, she's going to dominate in the future. Now, I say this very solemnly, the devil doesn't work openly. He works underground, stealthily. He makes evil look good and he makes good look evil. That we can see in the world today. You look around, people think bad is good and good is bad, right? They are so completely confused. Now, what is the time frame for this geopolitical new world order under the leadership of the Roman Catholic papacy? Let's see what he says in page 15 and 16.
As to the time factor involved, those of us who are under 70 will see at least the basic structures of the new world government installed. Those of us under 40 will surely live under its legislative, executive, and judicial authority and control.
Okay, so that was in 1986, 40 years ago, right? That's what he said. So there is nothing hidden there. It openly tells you what the objective of the Roman Catholic Church is. And by the way, Malachi Martin says it's inevitable that the papacy is going to be the winner because God has willed it. Now that's why he calls it the keys to the blood. God has said that that's the way, according to him, it's going to be, and no human being can prevent it. Now, here's the big question. How is this deadly wound going to be healed? And who is going to bring about its healing? And how is it going to happen? The crucial question is that, right? How will the papacy regain the power of the sword that she lost over 200 years ago? Who will loosen the chains that have restrained this system for the past 2 centuries? Even more pointedly, what nation in the world would be foolish enough to place the sword once again in the hand of such a despotic power? Prophecy reveals that the sword of the civil power will be restored to the papacy with the aid of the most unlikely nation. We're going to study that next week when we study Revelation's land beast, right? What country, knowing the historical track record of the papacy, would do that? It has to be someone who doesn't know history, or a nation that in its right mind, who is not in its right mind, right? The problem is that nation is not going to be in its right mind. Remember when we talked about the wine of Babylon? The wine of Babylon makes people drunk, and when they are drunk, they don't think straight. Now, Jeremiah 51:7 says that though the wine of Babylon, the nations become mad. In Hebrew, it means the nations become deranged, mentally ill. Do you see mental illness in America today? Starting from the top. If you please, the nations become, as a result of drinking the wine of Babylon, which are her false doctrine. People have forgotten the roots of prophecy, and that is why we need to remember history, because history defines the future and tells us what will happen. And prophecy clearly lists that out. So don't miss next week. We are going to talk about this land beast who, not in its right mind, is going to give the papacy her power back.